Welcome to the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, James Poletyllo, and the team from The Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, so we wanted to do something slightly different. This week, I'm talking to Matt Murphy and exploring his own personal learning journey. Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how you doing?
Really good, thank you. It's great that you can join us today. Now, you're someone who's worked alongside learning, not necessarily within learning, but you've supported lots of learning teams in your roles in the past, in what you've done, and also some of the work you do now. But also you're someone who's obviously been on a learning journey yourself as well. So you've been on a journey of discovery, and you're an individual who's, learning in your both professional work, but also about yourself and your wider approach to things. So really wanted to explore those things with you today. So do you want to give our listeners a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, certainly. So first of all, when you say, you've done a lot of learning, I still am every day, like most of us are. But in terms of a bit of my background, I was born in Margate in the southeast, and that's where I still currently reside. That's southeast England. And I grew up. I went through the system. I was. There's lots of. I can't speak for the youth of today, but I'm sure there's a lot more avenues that people can take. When I went to a primary school, secondary school, and then I went to an art college for 2 years and did a foundation degree at a place called KIAD at the time, which was Kent Institute of Art and Design. I think it's changed to something like UCCA now. Built up my portfolio, went off to university, and I went to Kingston University. I did 1 year of photography and graphic design, and then the 2 years of just straight graphic design. And I switched halfway through, after the first year, and thought that graphic design would be better for me. There's a few reasons. I could probably talk about that, but I don't want to be one of these people that says, oh, the tutors weren't good. They weren't giving me what I wanted, but I genuinely thought that. It was the first year that they were doing a photography course, and I just was struggling. There was things I wanted to know answers to, in particular things like the legalities of what we can and can't photograph, and that was just something that we just weren't being taught. So after the first year, I thought, well, do you know what? I can go over to graphic design, and I could answer a brief with photography. Why am I wasting my time with that? So that's what I did. So I did 2 years. I finished my degree in graphic design, and the idea was to head off to head off to London, and work for a big advertising agency or something like that. And I went home, just in my mind, for a temporarily, and in the end, I got a job down in the southeast, and it was quite comfortable. And I went into a studio business, a graphic design business there, and that's where I learned. I learned a lot in there, actually. And one of the things I would say is, in terms of learning, I went into a graphic design business, and the company was small, and we were responsible for printing the things that we produce. So if we produce flyers and things like that, we would then have to export them for print, lay them up on an SRA3 piece of paper, and take them downstairs and print them out, align them, put them on the guillotine, cut them up. So I was involved in every single part of the process of everything that I produced. And that was in terms of learning how to set up for print, and what problems you might face, and the mechanics of how things fold and things like that. Like, was incredibly good for the design, for learning how to design, ironically. And I did that for 5 years, and I got to a point where I thought, I want to leave and do something on my own. And it was actually, I loved where I worked. I loved the people. It was great, but I just was at a point in my life where I thought, I think I could be more creative, and that was the thing that was really driving me. So I left. Some clients followed. A bit diplomatic there. I think it was the same way that the business I worked for, the chap who I still speak with, I'm good friends with him still now. It's the same way that he started, so he is understanding of it. And I think that one thing that he really appreciated was that he never found out anything from anyone else. If I was delivering him bad news, I would tell him. It was out of respect, and he respected that. I don't know if he does listen to this, maybe he's harboring a few things and he wants to get in touch, then just let me know. But that was that was 8 years ago. 8 years ago now. I think if you're still harboring some things, then maybe we should talk. But no, I left that business, and I picked up some clients as well as the ones that followed, and started building my own business. I started trying to employ people. Found out fairly soon that I was not a great employer. I made friends with my employees, and this all rolls into a big sort of a wider piece about my personality, to be honest with you. I'm quite agreeable. I'm kind. I try to be kind, and it didn't serve me. And that's something I learned the hard way. I say the hard way, but it could have been a lot worse. But I think in terms of learning things like that, I think you have to go through those experiences, and the only way that you will figure things out is if you actually sit back and look at them and actually break them apart and digest them. I guess the people that don't learn from those sorts of experiences, they don't do that. And there's no guarantees that we don't just fall back into the same routine. But I have not tried to employ anyone since I think maybe 2017, 2018. And I just thought to myself, do you know what, Matt, you're on your own here. So I started, I was working for myself, and 2019 came along. I started to pivot slightly and move away, because my business was called Underline Creative, and the words creative was literally underlined, because that was the thing that I was passionate about, being creative, and I wanted that to be more of the focus. But I started to pivot, and when I decided that I was going to move away from having my own company and employing lots of people, I changed it to Murphy Creative, and that's what it is today. It's not a register. This is kind of not important, but it's not the name of the business yet. But it felt like it felt right if I was going to be on my own, and people use my business for me and who I am, that my name should be what the business is, and my logo is actually me writing my name, like Paul, a bit like Paul Smith, but not as global. And so obviously the pandemic hit. I managed to some work fell off a cliff. I worked a lot for the pub industry, as you know, and that's we kind of know what happened to that. But I managed to get work with some other clients who were changing the stuff that they were doing. And a client, Michael, the Royal College of Pathologists, were obviously very involved with what was going on with the pandemic, and I did a lot of webinar editing, I've been doing things like that and pivoting more towards video. Graphic design is definitely my bread and butter, but I'm still at a point where I'm trying to follow a passion. So that's where I'm at the minute. One of the hardest things that I find to do actually is to describe what I do for a living. I think if you asked 10 of my clients over the last years, they would all give you different answers.
I think that's not necessarily surprising, Matt, because you're a small business. You're a personal business providing that service that's bespoke to each of those clients. So it's going to be a very unique experience for each of those companies or people working with you. I love that sort of backstory of you going through and saying, right, in your first job, you managing that end-to-end process in a small business where you understand from beginning to end exactly what happens, and then you almost learn the impact you can have on everyone else through that process, which is not just within your career, but in lots of people's careers where they're in a smaller, more focused business and they can see everything end to end, rather than someone who's in a global corporate and does a tiny little bit of the process and doesn't see the impact or doesn't see that knock-on effect. So I think just learning that and knowing what you've been through, and that start of your career, which wasn't necessarily planned, but that's given you probably the firm foundation to go on to for the rest of your career. And then, like you said, falling into, all right, I'm going to get big, I'm going to employ people, I'm going to go and do this, and then working out that's not your bag. I think lots of people do that, and you either go for what's expected, or you look at what's the next logical step in your career, and sometimes people don't have that insight or ability to step back and go, actually that's not me, or that's not working for me, and they keep pursuing that. So the fact you've switched and changed and realigned and learned along that way, and I know, as you said right at the beginning, you're still learning, and a lot of that is about learning about you and how you approach things. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about that journey?
Learning about myself, that's been a bit of a crazy one. I feel like it only really got started around 2018. I mean, I'm 35 years old now. So in 2018, when I was about 31, I got divorced, and it kind of started a chain reaction of events. I've been in a very long-term relationship, and I got divorced, and I had to face. I can be quite introspective anyway, I think, and I think a lot. I think it's one of the reasons why I do the job I do. But when I turn that thinking power onto myself, it can be. Sometimes it can be quite destructive, but sometimes, and quite a lot of the time, it can be helpful and helps me develop myself. And I am very open to. I wrote this down actually before we were starting, because I think it's one of the most fundamental things about me, is that for a long time I was almost too open-minded and listened and took other people's opinions of me on way too much. And I don't know exactly where that comes from, but I think as I'm getting older and starting to understand myself, I'm finding a balance between listening to people, appreciating what I don't know and trusting them, and when to actually trust my own instincts and say, okay, well, actually, no, I don't believe that. This is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to proceed. I think there's that fine balance. And before 2018, I think that I would just take other people's words as gospel, and I read a book when I was younger called "It's Not How Good You Are, It's How Good You Want to Be" by a designer called Paul Arden. And there was one part of that book that stuck out to me, and it's about being part of a process and blame. And a good example would be this. So, graphic designer gets a brief. It comes through, does the work, produces the flyer, for instance, sends it back to the client, and client proofs it off. Everything's okay. It's fine. Goes to print. Now, this has happened various times in my life. And then the next thing that happens is there's a typo or there's a mistake on it. Now, where's the blame here? Who's the person who's responsible for this? I've met people in my life who would say, totally on the client. They proofed it off, they signed it off, etc. But in this book by Paul Arden, it said that it's actually quite an interesting graphic. It's a picture of a boy. It's a very old drawing, and it sounds very odd, but it serves a purpose. There's a fence in a garden, and there's a hole in the fence, and this chap has decided to put his willy through the fence, and on the other side is a goose, and the goose has bitten his willy, and it says the boy blames the goose blames the boy. And it's the whole sort of the idea that there's a process of what happened there, and decisions were made, and if you're part of that process, then you are as accountable to the blame as someone, for instance, like someone who is designing, who is tasked with proofing it off. So I would be sitting in my old office, and something would come back with a mistake, and the studio's response or party line would be, well, you proofed it off. And I would be sitting there like twiddling my thumbs, like, guys, but we have to be better. Like, we designed this, we should have maybe read it before more thoroughly when we sent it to the client, and things like that. And that stuck with me throughout my entire career. And I don't know if it's done me more harm than good, because I started to feel very responsible for things. And as I'm getting older, I'm starting to acknowledge that actually I don't think I am responsible. It doesn't serve me well to think that everything is my fault, or that certain things that go wrong are my fault. So yeah, it's been that phrase and that book, actually, it's a very interesting book, and it's very good because it's pretty short, but it gives you really good examples of creative situations, and I recommend that to your readers. But just be careful, because you have to take certain things with a pinch of salt. Yeah, it's been that has been quite a big point of my life. Maybe I took that too much as sort of a given, that if I'm part of the process, then it's my fault.
I think it's an interesting point, Matt, because it happens in all walks of life, and you've used the word blame there, and where it starts from, who's to blame when something goes wrong, then it becomes very much throwing things at each other, where again, I've been in all sorts of situations like that, whether that's things that have gone to print, whether it's things that haven't happened in the process, and we make assumptions, we think people are doing things, we communicate and we both hear what we want to hear and don't double check. There's all sorts of things that can break down in any of those processes, and it can be that things have run late, often in creative processes, because even producing learning is a creative process at the end of the day, and quite often you're at the there's an unmovable deadline at the end, and there's content being given to you at the beginning or whatever, and there's a clearly agreed timetable set out, everyone agrees to do things, and then things start to slip. The only thing that doesn't slip is the end deadline, and all best laid plans can disappear, because the work that came into you, maybe that's rushed around, or it's done last thing at night because that didn't come in at the time you'd allocated to it. It then goes back over to the client, and the client's going, well, I'm sure they've checked it, all I've got to do is sign it off. And you can see where things fall down, and it's often the process itself, and it's like, how do we remove the blame and think about the actuality of the process? And when we realize that there's a flag or a risk occurring in that process, because we know it's there, we know that this is going to go wrong because everything's been squeezed, and therefore we're all trying to think about how we fix it. And sometimes we get away with it, it's great. Sometimes there's a mistake in there, sometimes it's a minor mistake and no one really needs to lose sleep on it at the end of the day. Sometimes it's a catastrophic mistake, and it fundamentally there's something that's gone out wrong, and fundamentally wrong, that's going to cause a big issue. And I think it's, again, being able to unpick those things and being able to depersonalize them as well, because I think
that's key. I think, sorry to interrupt, but you've said the word process a few times now, and actually I think that's the key, isn't it? It's just like, well, placing blame and isn't really going to get us anywhere. The main thing that people, in my opinion, should focus on in those situations, if you're not being fired, is is how do we stop this from happening again? So my attitude would have been to create an internal process, perhaps, that we have a proofing process that goes, I think we did that anyway. We did do it, but maybe we need to have two people that look at it before it goes out to be proofed, or it goes to be printed, but I did get away from the point a little bit there, but what I was kind of trying to say was originally that's like, I think that my work and my personality and my character, I think they're quite intertwined. And actually, it's since the things that I've learned since my divorce, and that was essentially the biggest time in my life I had to look at who I was, my character, where it's falling short, and things that I need to address. And one of the big things I was living with at that time was guilt, and taking on the responsibilities and the feelings of others as if I caused them, and things like that. Can you imagine that in a business environment where you're running your own business, and actually, when you are starting to accept responsibility and you're starting to take on feeling responsible for looking after other people and things like that, and it starts to actually affect your income, and your livelihood, then that is when it can become a very, very troubling situation, as well as obviously in personal relationships. But I had almost no boundaries. And I think when we come, there is a wider piece, I think, on this. It's like, you know, when I left my old job, I wanted to take on every job. I don't care. Pay me half rate, blah, blah, blah. You know, we're scrambling around because we're so terrified that we won't have that work or we will lose the work. But as you're doing that, your boundaries are dropping, you're falling, you know, you're creating these relationships with these new clients and they think your rate is this, you know, it's not sustainable. It's just not sustainable over a longer period. So I went and I had CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And I looked at things like how I feel responsible for other people's feelings, you know, and stuff like that. And working on that within myself has made me a much better person in a working environment. Totally better. I ended relationships that were outside, like business relationships, shortly after my divorce. So I looked at things and I was like, well, that's not good for me. These people don't respect me. This is horrendous. Isn't, you know, the work wasn't even, well, you know, there's certain things that we'll say, you know, if it's a bad working relationship and you're getting paid really well, maybe you can suck it up and keep going, because it is worth it in the end. But, you know, I looked at I looked at myself, my working relationships and other relationships that I have with friends and, you know, and things like that, and I started to address all of these things that were not helping me. It was, I just find it quite interesting that personal, that thing that happened to me personally has really affected me going forward, and it's changed the way I work massively, you know.
And I think it's interesting that, you know, we are one person. We're not, you know, split off into different people in different aspects. Sometimes we present different faces, but that ability to see that actually maybe the way you're approaching all of your life or all of your relationships had those underpinning themes, or, you know, those things you needed to look at differently for you to get that value and respect and, you know, happiness and fulfillment you're looking for from them.
Definitely.
And you know, I think the last couple of years have probably prompted a lot of people to be more reflective, because I think everyone was too, you know, almost not everyone, but lots of people were so busy before, almost in the rat race, that there was never a pause for people to do this, unless, like, you know, you've had a life event or you've had something that's caused you to pause. But, you know, you've been on that journey of having that thing that caused you to pause, and then, you know, looking and reevaluating how you approach things. So I'm sure your story is something people can resonate with a lot in terms of how they think or approach things.
Yeah, I think that is, for me, that would be a key takeaway from all of this is, I think that you're talking about big life events, you know, and essentially things like trauma, and it's what happens to us directly after that and how we react to that can really make or break us, I think. You know, in terms of on the learning side of it all, that's how I learn. You know, I'm maybe someone that picks apart things that have happened a bit more. I've got a real serious interest in psychology, you know, and how we act. And some people in situations where things go drastically wrong, they'll maybe look to blame external factors, you know, and I don't know how much growth or learning can happen in that sphere. But for me personally, I basically look at myself a lot, you know, sometimes too much, definitely sometimes too much, but I look at my actions and how those were interpreted or how they were received, and how, you know, my reasons for doing it. And I can be very introspective. Only now in my life, I guess, is a point after therapy where I've looked at myself or I've been introspective through a more rational sphere, you know. Whereas before I would place blame entirely on myself, I'd actually say, well, hang on, let's look at what happened here. Why did this happen? You know, and start to look at, essentially, I don't like to use the word responsibility so much, because it's not about, I don't really believe in placing blame and things like that. It's just more like situations and personalities and all this sorts of stuff when they come together. But I am at a point in my life where I will not feel as responsible for things that happen when I look at them more objectively. But then that's it. It's when things happen, do we look at ourselves and ask ourselves, did I cause this? What's happening, etc. Or do we and look to improve that, or do we just look to put the blame on external factors and learn nothing?
So it sounds to me like you've been through that life change, that experience. It's got you to think about, you're a reflective person anyway. You unpick things, but you're doing that maybe, as you said, in a more rational way. So in your journey going forward, is that a planned journey? Are the things you want to achieve and work towards, or is it, an approach that you apply to the direction life takes you in? How's that going? Or is there a plan? Is it just a different approach on that windy road?
You've got me here. You started that with talking about there's been a life event. I still think I'm in it to a degree. It has been one of the hardest things that I'm having to face, I think, to figure out that life, that life journey. It's very complicated. I think there's multiple factors in it. Sometimes I think to myself, I'm single, I don't have a partner, I don't have kids and anything like that, and those things can be a big purpose for people. Kids, massively. I don't have them, but I can imagine that if I did, that would become my purpose in life in a way. I'm entertaining the idea of that may not happen. So what is that bigger picture? What is that bigger purpose? I've heard some people say that it doesn't matter, you shouldn't have that, and I do agree to that in some respects. But I don't know. I think that for me, I would see having a purpose or a sense of direction as a real drive. I've got short-term goals that are really sort of giving me some energy, but I've been in a big slump when it comes to figuring out what I'm doing with my life. I feel like part of me just feels like I'm getting ahead of my midlife crisis, just getting it out of the way nice and early. But yeah, no, you really have got me there. I went through a stage just before the pandemic actually, and I started to think to myself, you're a graphic designer, you are developing a sense of your values. You're developing some values which are things like is a reflection of what's happening in society, sustainability, looking at like sustainability in the environment and things like that. Particularly, I looked at what I do for a living, and it's just like, well, I essentially brainwash people to consume. How is it? And as my values grew, it started to really affect how I felt about what I did for a living. Actually, there was the creative festival. I'm quite proud of this actually, because it took quite a lot of balls to do. But there was a creative festival in Margate I went to, and there was an ad agency talking about creating a sustainable advert. And they were talking about how they directed a video across the world by using Zoom. They posted out a camera to these to the girls that were starring in the women that were starring in the advert, and they had this whole talk about how no one flew out there, they just directed it all remotely and all this sorts of stuff. And I said to them, after they gave their talk, I put my hand up and I said, hiya, arguably the most sustainable advert is one that doesn't exist. How do you feel about the fact that you're essentially designing or creating adverts for consumption, and does that weigh on your conscience at all? And their attitude was, I agree with it. It's well, it's going to happen either way. So let's try and be environmentally or friendly or sustainable with it. But my sense of values grew, and I started working more with charities. I switched to wanting to do more video work as well. I think that's video is my future. I do struggle still sometimes with. I say struggle. I've got I had a chat with my therapist not so long ago about neurodiversity, and this is something which is kind of becoming a real big thing in my life, because I'm recognizing that I've got essentially like a bit of a magpie effect. I've got a lot of self-belief in being able to create, and it doesn't, and that does it doesn't obviously I'm not held back in what I do create. So 1 week I'll be doing photos, 1 week I'll be doing graphic design, 1 week I'll be doing installations somewhere, you know, and you can imagine that trying to move forward and have a sense of direction when that is essentially how you operate, it can be quite tough. And I listened to a podcast called Make Art Not Content. He was talking about having your Polaris star. You know, it's not how hard you can work towards one thing, it's how much you can ignore everything else around you, you know. But I don't know, you know. I still feel that, you know, today I've come back from the studio, I was doing a painting, you know. Tomorrow I'm off to film with the BRC, you know, to shoot interviews and capture some podcast audio. I'm shooting videos for myself, interviews about a gentleman who sadly passed away in I believe it was in 2012, who left us thousands of drawings of cars. You know, we're working to create a gallery and video and a colouring in book to send to hospitals to improve the lives of people that are in those hospitals. You know, how can I have a sense of direction, James? It's a tough one. It's a tough one. But I do believe that going forward, I would like to do more video work. I'm emotionally articulate, creative, and I think that the video personally, and even discussions like this are where, and I'm quite good with people. I think that that's where my future lies, to be honest with you. Yeah.
I like the challenge back. You know, you're talking about the most sustainable ad is an ad that doesn't happen at all, because you see that a lot of, you know, ethically companies jumping on bandwagons, or effectively we're going to do harm to the environment, but we're going to do less harm than we've done before, but we're going to continue doing the harm. Yeah, it is. So we've got to where we are, and people are, you know, moving back, but they can't necessarily just go, okay, we're going to stop all adverts. You know, as an ad agency, I think that would be quite self-defeating. but you know, so people are making steps back. But I think those questions where you do step back and really challenge an industry, so where people have stepped back and say challenge fast fashion and saying, you know, ethically we still need to wear clothes and all of those things, but do we need to change quite as often, or have the fashion, you know, cycle that's driving that consumption? So I think there are some real challenges that people are putting back to some of those things that have become normal or perceived to be normal within, or promoted by advertising and everything else as being normal, etc. So I think it's good for people to ask those challenges. And it's good that people are actually, like yourself, going back and saying, I can do something myself, so I can go and change my client base, or I can start to think on focusing on a variety of different work. And, you know, not necessarily having that one single purpose, but an eclectic set of work that's maybe, you know, touching on some of those value things more often for people. Because I think that's what people do challenge, is saying, you know, for myself, I had the same journey getting towards when my son was born. I was looking at it and saying, how am I ever going to spend time and be a good parent if I'm doing the types of work I was doing at the time? Because I would never have had any time around him, and what's the point? And, you know, you do have to make those decisions. But again, I've stepped away from businesses in the past because I felt they've been unethical in the way they've approached people, or the way they've approached business, or the way they've approached my function in learning and development. You know, I want to help people learn, develop, grow, and be better. If I felt I'm there and, you know, doing a load of surface wash and tick boxing, that's not for me. Not everyone will make those decisions, but I think having that ability to question yourself, to understand those parts of you that are important to you, and explore that, because we don't know, and those things change.
I think you've just touched on something there, because just something you said just made me think about what I said earlier about stepping away from graphic design. And hats off to you, because this is quite interesting. Perhaps I need to be in the graphic design sector because I'm conscious of the environment, you know. Who's going to replace me? Maybe someone who doesn't care and is just like, you know, not taking things into consideration. Yeah, that's a very good point. Perhaps I should just maintain that, but make sure that I'm always sustainable choices with the design that I do. Probably wouldn't have a lot of work though.
It's an interesting one because, again, I think videos are immensely powerful, and the best videographers I've worked with, or are people like yourself who have that emotional connection and can really draw out people's stories and can do that storytelling bit and make it more than just something that's glossy, but something that's really touches people and connects with people. And we know when we've seen those types of videos, when we've been involved in those, and there aren't a lot of them are out really. When you look at it, there's a lot of things that are slick and well done, but someone who can really attach and build emotion and tell a story, I think that's an immensely powerful and great thing to apply to any different sector, because it's so powerful storytelling.
That actually, again, it's in terms of direction. I've got a plan in the not so distant future to start reaching out to people and companies to ask them if they have a story or anything they want to tell, and not video. Don't say, oh, do you want a video? I want to say, do you want a story? What is your story? But I don't. It's somewhat stubborn, and I think it's from the things that I've learned over the years. It's that I don't want to produce what they want. In a way, how weird does that sound? I want to produce what I want to produce because I know that I can make impactful, hard-fitting things, and that's why I want to kind of step away from the videographer name tag and move more towards being the director. But it doesn't mean I want to step away from the camera, because directors are very hands-off. But I want to be known and trusted for being able to produce compelling video content, and that's one of the reasons why I think one of the attitudes I have when looking for clients and working with clients is finding brave clients, because clients that aren't brave will have you producing the same mundane stuff as everybody else, and that is not the stuff that impacts the world, in my opinion. So yeah, working on being trusted with people's stories is something that I really want to look at in the future.
No, I love that, because that resonates with us as a business as well. We were talking about what makes our clients similar, because they're in, like you, different sectors, different types of work we do. There's no one project that is the same as the next one. But the thing that does line up across all of our clients is they actually want to do something that has an impact, and they don't want to do the same old as everyone else. They want to do something that's right for their people, right for their purpose, or whatever that happens to be. And it's not you can't put in a Google search or a search on LinkedIn to find those clients, but it's about building that story and about building that point of difference, because it's not the easy road to tread. The easy road to tread is just to, as you said, be the videographer that just produces whatever the client turns up with and keeps the client happy. To actually challenge and push the mold and stuff, it is brave. It is brave.
Yeah, I think so. One of the bravest clients that I think of my generation would be the 2012 Olympic Committee. The London 2012 logo was one of those ones where it's I don't think anyone will ever forget it. And it's the same with things like Seal It Bang and other brands. It's just the stuff that looks, when you look at it, you think someone would be insane to pay for that, but it's the stuff that we end up never forgetting in a way. So yeah, I think that's important to me. Brave clients, trusting clients as well, because there's a certain amount of trust. I'm lucky enough to have a bit of a catalogue of video work that conveys that I can do what I can do. So if there's any aspiring young creative video makers or filmmakers out there, go out and shoot your own stuff like you're not already.
So if people do want to, connect in, have a look at your work, find out more about you, have a further conversation, what's the best way of them doing that, Matt?
Well, my phone number is... I actually have just started. I came off Instagram not so long ago. Through my introspection and my therapy, I learned a lot about my relationship with it. So Instagram is actually probably not the best place to contact me. My Instagram handle is @MatthewJohnMurphy, and I use that primarily to post and promote my newsletter, which I send out. which this will no doubt feature on. I send out a newsletter every one or 2 weeks. If you want to sign up for it, you can go to murphycreative.co.uk, and it's on the homepage there. You can sign up, or you can contact me on my website, essentially. But yeah, my website is definitely the best place to get me.
And we'll make sure that those links are in the show notes below.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. You could also remove the bit where I fluff my own website as well. That would be gregreat.
Definitely do that as well.
No, you can leave that in actually, and even leave this bit in because it's quite funny.
We'll leave the authentic bits in. And anything else that's coming up for you? So any exciting projects or anything you're really passionate about that's coming up?
Well, as you know, actually, I'm working with the BRC, the British Retail Consortium, to help produce content for their summer leadership schools in creating retail leaders of the future, which I think is fantastic because, again, they're looking at things like the effect of retail on the planet, looking at things like inclusivity in the workplace, all this good stuff, which is going to make the world a better place. And I'm working closely with them on producing some of that content. What else have I got in the pipeline? The project I said about the gentleman who unfortunately passed away but left us with all this artwork, I just saw that as an opportunity to improve the lives of people. He died in hospital. He was there for 5 months, and every day he drew 8 drawings. His name was Leonard. And when I saw that he had left, I think I was shown his artworks about 7-8 years later. I was like, we have to do something with this. This can't just sit here. This guy's got a legacy. It's sitting right here. So I'm working with a doctor, a science-based artist who is also a doctor, called Dr. Lizzie Burns, to hopefully to improve the lives of patients in hospitals. And then I've got my YouTube channel, which will have, hopefully, when the pandemic allows me to, trips around the world. Starting with the UK, and shooting some cinematic travel stuff. But I want to have a little bit of a twist on it. I want to. One of the ones I'm looking at doing is traveling to Iceland, but I would like to go by train and by boat. Should probably take me about six or 7 days. So, yeah, just throw myself out there back into the world and see what comes from it. So, yeah.
That's brilliant, Matt, and thank you for sharing that today. And it's been great to catch up, and look forward to seeing what happens next, where you travel to next. And yeah, I love your travel stuff because saw the one of you heading off to Mount Olympus and stuff. Yeah. So I think there's some really interesting bits of video work that you've got out there as well that people could dip into.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you've not already done so, please follow our podcast. And if the learning effect can help you and your organisation, please do get in touch. You can find both James and Katie on LinkedIn, and our contact details are in the show notes